19.59 million visitors have vanished without a trace. Just 2 months ago, Dubai was still basking in its status as the crossroads of the world, with hotel occupancy rates hitting 94%. But by April 2026, everything seems to have gone into free fall to below 20%. You didn't hear that wrong. An empire built on absolute faith in mobility is now facing a systemic heart attack as 80% of its transit passengers suddenly disappear into thin air. Now, the silence at DXB International Airport is not just the absence of engine noise, it's the silence of a billion-dollar graveyard, where hundreds of Super A380s and Boeing 777s lie exposed under the desert dust. Even at the foot of the majestic Burj Khalifa, the miles-long lines you once saw in the news have vanished without a trace. Gilded corridors sit empty, 7-star hotels stand hollow, and in parking lots, supercars are abandoned with keys still in the ignition, remnants of rushed escapes to avoid prison sentences over unpaid debts. What has caused a luxurious kingdom, once capable of turning desert into gold, to fall into a deep coma so quickly? Is this a painful restructuring, or the foretold end of a symbol of limitless ambition? Let's decode the sudden decline of the richest city in the world and see what will actually be left when the world suddenly stops moving. Do you remember the glossy advertisements for Dubai International Airport, DXB? A place that once boasted a pace of one takeoff or landing every 1.1 minutes, a non-stop money printing machine. But perhaps reality in April 2026 is telling a different story. If you step into the terminal now, what greets you is not the buzz of the elite, but a chilling silence. The central display system, once glowing with the names of faraway cities like New York, London, or Paris, has been painted red. Lines of canceled and rescheduled appear densely, as if reminding you that the world no longer seems interested in stopping here. And look out at the runway. You'll see those flying palaces, Emirates Airbus, a 380s, and Boeing 777s lying under the blazing sun. Instead of stretching their wings across the sky, they are turning into a billion-dollar aircraft graveyard. It seems that keeping an A380 grounded still costs about $5,000 to $10,000 per month in minimal maintenance alone. That doesn't even include massive bank interest payments, quietly eating away at the budget, a financial burden that might make even oil tycoons frown at the balance sheet. When 80% of transit traffic, the lifeblood of this system, suddenly evaporates, people begin to vaguely recognize a transit shock. Perhaps when the valve of human flow is shut off, all that luxurious infrastructure instantly becomes an oversized liability. As airspace gradually closes, ground services can't escape the same fate, especially at Palm Jumeirah and the 7-star hotels. Once the centerpiece of million-like Instagram photos, they now resemble water cemeteries. The water surface is so still you can see the reflection of a luxury that no longer has consumers. No one really wants to sip an expensive cocktail by an empty pool, where the silence reminds you of a system falling apart. Even the cathedral of consumerism, Dubai Mall, has not escaped. Its gilded corridors, once packed with visitors, now hold only long rows of mannequins, guarding empty storefronts. You can easily spot famous American brands like Tiffany & Co. or Apple sitting motionless, where operating costs from massive air conditioning systems to staff are burning through profits with every passing hour. Even at the foot of Burj Khalifa, once crowded with endless lines, the space now feels eerily empty. On forums like Reddit, a few rare visitors share their amazement at renting an entire resort at Palm Jumeirah for dirt-cheap prices. It may sound like a bargain for a vacation, but for those who understand operations, it's a red warning sign of the collapse of a business model that only survives on mass demand. There is a harsh rule in this land. To maintain an artificial city in a 100-degree desert, you have to burn money, a lot of money. It's estimated that Dubai must spend hundreds of millions of dollars per day just to keep air conditioning systems running and prevent infrastructure from being swallowed by sand. It's an uneven battle with nature. When the flow of tourist money stops, the city is slowly being eroded from within by the very harshness of the desert. People often say, when there is belief, sand can turn into gold. But when belief wavers, gold is just dust. Dubai is believed to have bet everything on the expectation of perpetual growth. But perhaps this freefall is living proof that material assets, no matter how much steel, glass, or rare marble they're made of, become worthless without geopolitical confidence. An 80% drop in bookings is not just numbers on paper. It appears to be a strategic retreat by the ultra-wealthy. They are quietly moving their capital to safer places, perhaps stable markets in the US. or long-established financial centers instead of betting on a shimmering mirage, a dazzling yet fragile illusion on scorching sand. We've heard a lot about the miracle of Dubai, a place that connects east and west with just one flight. But the air highways crossing Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait, which once served as the lifeblood of this city, are gradually turning into dangerous zones. As conflicts escalated in early 2026, these corridors were effectively erased from the civil aviation map. Do you remember those glamorous flights from London to Singapore or Paris to Sydney with a stopover in Dubai? It seems they are quickly becoming relics of a distant era of prosperity. When the FAA, our Federal Aviation Administration, and European safety agencies began issuing red warnings about security risks, the game changed. Aviation insurers, entities that never accept unnecessary risk, have likely pushed war risk premiums to sky-high levels or simply pulled out altogether. So what's the consequence? Pragmatic giants like British Airways and Lufthansa seem to have had no hesitation in turning away. As they reroute their flights, Dubai, once a central hub, suddenly risks becoming a dead end, a place no pilot wants to land unless absolutely necessary. Let's try a simple calculation that Wall Street fund managers would likely care about. When direct routes are no longer possible, airlines are forced to detour over Saudi Arabia or through narrow southern corridors. This adds at least 2 to 3 hours to flight time. For a jet aircraft, an extra 3 hours means burning tens of tons of additional fuel. In a scenario where oil prices are highly volatile and at times hit around $26 per barrel, as some projections for 2026 suggest, the already razor-thin margins of the aviation industry appear to be getting crushed. Perhaps most concerning is the fate of low-cost carriers like Fly Dubai. Their business model built on optimizing time and fuel is, quite literally, being wiped out. When the cost of detours exceeds what average passengers can afford, this disruption is not just the loss of a brand, but the loss of the tourist flow that underpins the entire service economy here. You know, luxury cannot exist without a massive support system from the middle and lower classes. But the disaster doesn't stop in the sky. If you've followed economic news, you know how critical the Strait of Hormuz is. When threats at this choke point paralyze Jebel Ali port, Dubai appears to be facing a pincer attack from both inside and out. Dubai doesn't really produce anything significant. Everything from the steak in a 5-star hotel to the construction materials for skyscrapers must be imported. When both the skies and the seas are choked, logistics costs seem to skyrocket to absurd levels. Can you believe a basic breakfast costing up to $45? That no longer reflects the value of food, but the price of gridlock. In the end, it seems we are witnessing an expensive lesson in putting all your eggs in one basket or more precisely, placing an entire economy on a single transit point. When the world is open and peaceful, Dubai's intermediary role is dazzling. But when geopolitics becomes turbulent, that crossroads turns into the most vulnerable point. Elites and savvy investors seem to have recognized this fragility. They are quietly shifting their confidence and capital toward more self-sufficient centers, where prosperity is less dependent on the instability of neighboring regions. Dubai has been extremely successful in selling the world an irrational dream. It convinced us that skiing in 40 degrees Celsius desert heat at Ski Dubai, or building massive palm-shaped islands like Palm Jumeirah, are proof of human evolution. But let's be honest, doesn't something feel off? Perhaps the belief that pouring enough billions into the sand can eventually bend the laws of physics has finally reached its limit. Maintaining these man-made wonders requires a life support system more complex than a space station. Consider this. Dubai has 0 natural fresh water and less than 1% arable land. Every glass of water served at a high-end lounge, and every Wagyu steak at a luxury bistro must either pass through energy-intensive desalination plants which consume massive amounts of fossil fuels or be air-freighted from halfway across the globe. When the cash flow stutters, the city doesn't just slow down, it gasps for air. It's no different from an astronaut whose oxygen line has been crimped in the vacuum of space. Doesn't Dubai's economic model feel like a high-stakes episode of Shark Tank that simply refuses to end? In this desert theater, you aren't allowed to slow down, let alone stop. To keep the eyes of Wall Street and London fixed on them, Dubai must perpetually engineer the next biggest, tallest, or most expensive landmark. It is in many ways a cleverly masked debt spiral. To service the interest on the last record-breaking skyscraper, they must launch an even more outrageous project to attract fresh financing. But what happens when the gears grind to a halt? Economists have noted that when growth in such a model drops from a projected 5% to a stagnant 0%, the entire financial architecture doesn't just sag, it begins to tumble like a row of expensive dominoes. You might be surprised to learn that oil, the very thing people assume is the safety net here, now accounts for less than 1% of Dubai's GDP. Unlike its neighbors in Abu Dhabi or Riyadh, Dubai doesn't have a massive sovereign resource cushion to break its fall if international investors decide to pack up their capital and head for safer harbors. If you've been browsing luxury travel forums lately, you'll notice a distinct wave of traveler fatigue emerging among the elite. The sophisticated traveler is growing weary of what they call artificial perfection or plastic feelings. Everything is dazzling, everything is gold-plated, yet it seems to lack a genuine cultural soul. In an era where the world is shifting toward meaningful travel, seeking authentic, sustainable, and historic experiences, Dubai's pre-programmed glamour is starting to look as outdated as a pager in a smartphone world. People are realizing that you can't manufacture 1,000 years of history with a 3D printer and a fleet of construction cranes. Finally, let's talk about the hidden costs that the brochures conveniently leave out. Those magnificent artificial islands, they are currently in a lopsided battle with coastal erosion and rising sea levels. The cost of holding the sand in place and preventing billion-dollar villas from slowly sinking back into the Persian Gulf has turned into a series of financial black holes. We are talking about maintenance budgets that disappear faster than a stack of chips at a high-stakes table in Caesar's palace. When the cost of simply existing outweighs the revenue of being a destination, the math no longer adds up. It begs the question, how much longer can you maintain a palace of glass when the very ground it's built on is reclaiming its debt? Perhaps the light has finally been turned on, and the world is realizing that while you can buy the view, you can't always buy the future. The airport shuts down. Tourists stop coming. What happens next? The people working in the service sector lose their jobs. That's exactly what's happening in a place once seen as a promised land. Captains flying a 380S and Boeing 777S, people who once earned enviable incomes of around $450,000 a year, including housing allowances and their children's tuition at prestigious international schools. But those flying palaces have turned into glass cages, as companies use the tactic of indefinite unpaid leave. Instead of layoffs, which would require generous severance, they push employees into a legal gray zone. Without flying pay, actual income seems to have dropped by as much as 80%. Credit card bills and supercar loans are still there, but the once waterfall-like cash flow has dwindled into small drops in the desert. Perhaps the most painful part is for those who spent 15 or 20 years devoted to a symbol, treating Dubai as a second home. They've just received a bitter lesson in what could be called fool's gold. You know, in a spreadsheet of cost management, people are sometimes treated as nothing more than replaceable parts. When the machine runs smoothly, you get flashy perks that make you think you're part of a family. But when it breaks down, those parts are discarded without hesitation. That glamour was just a golden chain, binding professionals to a system where stability is an illusion sustained by money. In Dubai, if you lose your job, you don't just lose your income, you likely lose your residency as well. Visa rules are harsh. You usually have no more than 60 days to get your life in order, liquidate assets, and leave. Can you imagine luxury homes or expensive furniture being dumped on expat groups just to raise money for a plane ticket home? Time pressure turns a lifetime of accumulated wealth into fragments. That's likely why a wave of highly skilled engineers and pilots is finding its way back to more sustainable values in their home countries, or shifting to emerging hubs like Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, where promises still carry some weight. From an objective standpoint, this purge has completely shattered what was once called the social contract of this place. Dubai promised a tax-free life and absolute financial security. But when risk appears, all the burden seems to fall on workers, rather than being shared by corporations or the state. This harsh treatment of the core workforce will likely leave a permanent scar. What do you think? In the future, will top talent still dare to bet their future on a place where loyalty is treated as outdated? It seems the best place to work in the world brand is burning its own sign, and the cost of attracting talent in the future will definitely not be cheap. Prosperity built on coldness may ultimately be repaid with abandonment. There's a place that luxury cable car tours or Emirates first-class flights never mention, Sonapur. In Hindi, it means city of gold, but reality is turning it into a trap with no way out. It may sound ironic that about 40% of the support workforce, those handling baggage or cleaning aircraft at DXB, are falling into a state of paper unemployment. They still have visas, still belong to the system, but receive no pay. When parent companies stop payments, crowded labor camps where 10 to 12 people share a single room suddenly become invisible. Prisons. Under the scorching desert heat, when air conditioning, the only luxury keeping them alive is cut to save costs. The line between survival and tragedy becomes thinner than ever. In the West, we believe in labor values and minimum protections. But here, management thinking seems to treat people as a variable cost. Those who poured sweat into building Burj Khalifa or Dubai Mall are being discarded like defective components when the economic machine suddenly malfunctions. The kafala labor system appears to have created a massive social safety gap. No unemployment insurance, no freedom to change jobs. Isn't it painful to see the contrast? Billion-dollar aircraft sitting idle on the runway, while the people who directly serve them may not even find $5 for a proper meal. This can be seen as a moral bankruptcy of a development model that focuses only on appearances while neglecting its core. Luxury always requires a massive operating system behind it. When the base of the pyramid collapses, the basic services that maintain the city's splendor suddenly grind to a halt. The lush green spaces maintained through extraordinary effort in the desert begin to wither. Waste piles up in logistics areas, and iconic infrastructure starts to physically deteriorate. Dubai may be realizing a harsh truth too late. You can buy the most premium Ferrari, but without regular maintenance, it's just a piece of scrap metal. A city cannot function without respect for its core workforce. Modern investors who increasingly focus on environmental, social, and governance metrics, or ESG, are likely starting to worry. Who would want to attach the names of major American corporations to a system accused of extreme labor exploitation in times of crisis? The collapse of this working class is not just a humanitarian tragedy, it's also a black hole that destroys the region's ability to recover. Once the trust of the workforce is lost, the cost of rebuilding infrastructure in the future will likely become more expensive than ever. You cannot rebuild an empire on resentment. For decades, Dubai has portrayed itself as the Switzerland of the Middle East. It didn't just sell hotel rooms, it sold a frictionless environment where everything from security to service ran like a perfectly maintained Rolex. For those exhausted by chaos, Dubai felt like a peaceful oasis, a shelter where geopolitical risks were stopped right at the border. But there is an unwritten rule among VIPs. They can spend tens of thousands of dollars without blinking as long as nothing unexpected happens. The moment you start wondering whether the air defense system will work tonight, or whether your private jet will take off on time, the value of luxury drops faster than the stock of a failed startup. Recently, people have been noticing a phenomenon often called being nickel and dimed. Hidden fees are popping up like mushrooms after rain. Resort fees, pool fees, and various service surcharges that were once implicitly included in the already sky-high room rates. In early 2026 alone, more than 500 complaints about lack of transparency in fees have been recorded. For a self-made individual, being charged a few $100 extra for pool access is not about the money, it's an insult. Luxury disappears the moment you have to frown and reread a bill, the way you would at an untrustworthy auto shop. Could this be a sign of a system trying to squeeze the last remaining guests to make up for empty avenues? Perhaps the scariest part is not losing money, but the feeling of being stuck. As Emirates' flight schedules begin to falter and routes are disrupted, the promise of seamless connectivity shatters. A vacation paradise quickly turns into a trap if you constantly worry about being stranded in the desert for security reasons. And look at the workforce. When standardized smiles are replaced by the exhaustion of remaining staff after waves of layoffs, the brand value Dubai spent decades building begins to crumble. A system operating on fear and understaffing can hardly deliver a royal experience. In the economics of experience, there is a harsh truth. Trust is a non-renewable resource. Once the illusion of perfection is broken, rebuilding it costs more than constructing 10 more Burj Khalifas. It seems the market is going through a late awakening. Dubai, it turns out, is not exempt from the laws of geopolitics. When risk emerges, it is just a remote and unstable strip of sand like anywhere else. Dubai is likely not collapsing due to a lack of concrete or gold. It is collapsing because its most important commodity has expired: absolute trust. What do you think? Would you still be willing to bet your peace of mind on a promise that is already cracked? When certainty disappears, even golden symbols become nothing more than lifeless metal under the scorching sun. Perhaps the lesson here is, never trust a paradise built on the fragility of flight routes. Dubai may not collapse in the literal sense of concrete structures crumbling, The great towers will still stand there, tall and proud, and the desert sand will remain at their feet as it has for thousands of years. But there is a more practical question we must face. Will the Dubai dream still exist? Can a city built entirely on belief survive once that belief is gone? It seems that, for the first time in modern history, the world has begun to stop betting on Dubai. Are we witnessing the inevitable end of a business model overly dependent on surface-level glamour, or is this just a brief pause before Dubai reinvents itself into something more grounded? If it were you, would you still be willing to book a flight here tomorrow? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because the answers from observers like you will help shape the future of this city. A quick note. The analysis above is based on economic data and real developments from 2026. The world always operates with unexpected variables, and this content is intended to provide a multi-dimensional perspective, not financial advice or an official forecast from any organization. Always remain a clear-headed observer. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next analysis series.